Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to DM Direction, or DMD number 2. We wanted to share this interview we got to be a part of on the podcast known as Let's Ask an Expert, hosted by Andrew Smith. We went into detail discussing the fundamentals of what Dungeons and Dragons consists of. This is to help novice players get started. We discussed tips for new dungeon masters to be better at enhancing your role-playing experience.
Andrew has interviewed many interesting people on his podcast before. He's had guests such as a winner from the game show Wheel of Fortune, to even someone who's helped save lives during the 2019 Dayton, Ohio shooting. Please check out his channel down below. He was great to work with, and if you know future channels looking for guests, send them our way. If you know someone new to Dungeons & Dragons, you can be sure to share this with them to help them get a better understanding, as well as to get great tips to start off their next D&D adventures right. Without further ado, here's our interview we had with Andrew from Let's Ask an Expert.
Welcome to episode 12, Let's Ask an Expert, a show where a novice host asks expert guests above average questions. I'm your host, Andrew Smith. Thank you for listening wherever you may be. You want to follow the show on social media? I hope you would. You can find us at Let's Ask an Expert, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And of course, you can subscribe and listen to the show wherever expert podcasts can be found. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and elsewhere. Well, my guests, and that, of course, means plural, first time in show history, we've had two guests on at the same time, are experts in the ever-popular and nearly 50-year-old tabletop role-playing game Dungeons and Dragons. Maybe you've heard of it, right? You've never played D&D, or you've only, like I said, just heard of it in passing. Maybe through pop culture, like Big Bang Theory, for instance. And stay tuned as my experts today will break down everything for you. And when they are not appearing on expert podcasts like this one, they're busy hosting their own podcast called DM Told Me To. You can listen, and subscribe, and download to that show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. And you can follow their show on social media on Instagram at DM Told Me To with an underscore between each word. Please welcome to Let's Ask an Expert, Ryan Nolan and Taylor Swint. Guys, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's good to be here.
How
And
was
hey guys,
that?
I was gonna say, it's me, Ryan. I'm the dungeon master, the guy that runs the campaign in our store, in our podcast of DM Told Me To.
And I'm Tyler, also the co-host of DM Told Me To with Ryan.
So how was that intro for you guys? Is that good intro for you?
Yeah, I thought that was good.
Good. Okay.
I did notice you called me Taylor, but I'm not
Did
mad
I call
about
you
it.
Taylor? Oh no.
I think it was just a Freudian slip there.
It may have been.
That's all right.
It may have been. I was listening to some Taylor Swift, perhaps. There it is. Guys,
First time.
no. Taylor, there it is again. Tell our audience where you guys are from originally and where you currently reside.
Sure. So I currently live in Averill Park, New York. It's a smaller town also in that, being Postingkill, which not many people have heard of if you're from New York. It's upstate New York area, so not near the city. And I've lived here for the majority of my life. Before that, I was born more towards the Poughkeepsie area and came up here when I was like 3 or 4, so I don't remember too much of that. But right now I currently reside in Averill Park, New York.
And I'm from upstate New York. I lived in Ballston Lake, which is outside of Albany. And yeah, that's a distinction that people think when you're from New York and anywhere within the state, you are a New Yorker. I'm like, well, kind of like I'm from upstate. Like, thank you, but not exactly what you're thinking of, but love the state. Haven't gone back in a while, but it was a ton of fun to live there. Tyler, not Taylor. Tyler, where are you from originally, and where do you currently reside?
Yeah, so I've grown up in Averill Park. That is how Ryan and I met. We met in grade school up through high school, graduated together. Um, but now I currently live in Albany. That's where I attend university. Um, and yeah, hopefully I would love to travel out of New York again someday.
Go what? Great Danes.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, go Great Danes.
Go Great Danes, making the NCAA tournament.
Yeah.
Well, next time it's a thing, I guess. Maybe this year or next year.
Yeah,
But
not this year, but hopefully
yeah,
now.
maybe next year, maybe 2021. Be better for all of us. We hope. All right, and in keeping with tradition on this show, I invite all my guests. Let's ask an expert to enjoy a drink with me. It can be alcoholic, non-alcoholic, whatever you guys prefer. Gentlemen, Ryan, starting first. What did you end up going with tonight?
So I ended up going with the good old filtered water from the fridge, and no ice cubes because I have sensitive teeth. So
Very, very
that's what I have.
Tyler, how about you?
Went for the hard stuff. Got some Fireball with me today.
Okay, here we
Hmm.
go. Well, I polished off a Coors Light. So, okay, and I've talked about this before on the show, but there's a prep session, kind of we just talk. I mean, a prep session. You're not in a green room, but we just talk, and during that, usually I have a couple drinks, sometimes like three. I think I had one episode, and I had a Coors Light, a 16-ounce Coors Light that's already done, and then today I got in. I'm holding this up like you can see it, but that's obviously not the case. An iron flask. It's a double-walled insulated water bottle, 64-ounce water bottle, and I don't plan to drink the whole thing during the show, or else there might be an intermission. But it's just got good old-fashioned Brita filtered water in it, so we're drinking that as well. So some beer and some water, and I'll take a sip right now. Okay, well, let's start with this, guys. In as simple of terms as you guys can explain it, especially for those listening who have never played Dungeons and Dragons, or dare I say never even heard of Dungeons and Dragons. Blasphemy, I know, right? What is Dungeons and Dragons? Ryan, we can start with you.
Sure. So, to me, the way that I look at what Dungeons and Dragons is it's a game that's set up that, in my opinion, I think is different than any other game that you could possibly have, right? If you go to the casino, you could play card games, board games, things like that. But this is a game where kind of everyone's trying to work together to try to achieve a common goal. And that's through perhaps somebody is reading off of a planned script that somebody has made of how to play a game and things like that. And I would look at it as it's a fun way to help escape reality, because especially now with everything going on, reality can be tough and hard for a lot of people. And I kind of look at, and people will say this, that they help to use Dungeons and Dragons to be a good way to, just even if it's for a few hours a week, to sit down with some good friends that you haven't talked to in a long time and be able to do something together, whether if it's online, in person, and be able to escape the kind of harsh reality of what's going on and almost kind of delve into a world of make-believe just for a little bit, like an experience.
Kind of like an escape of sorts,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
for sure.
Tyler, we can add to that in any way?
Yeah, I think Ryan nailed it mostly on the head. But just I would like to add that it is also a narrative. You're creating a story with people, and you will remember those events and those like harsh moments just as much as you would reality. And for that, I think it goes deeper than other games. Monopoly. How many Monopoly games do you remember exactly everything that happened? Not many,
None.
but
None. No one wants to play that game. I love playing it. Oh, it takes too long. That's the big problem with it, right? But so,
that is a similarity. D&D takes a while.
but you enjoy
Yes.
the process, right? Like you enjoy that fact of it. You get engrossed in the game, right?
Absolutely. It's like
For sure.
it's addicting, honestly.
So to take that a step further, right? Like this is not a game necessarily where there's like a board and a six-sided die and movable pieces and you go from one end to the other. This has sort of like a customizable format. Is that correct in saying?
For sure. And that's one of those things where I can what I'll do is like I'll explain this kind of quick. So by being somebody that helps run the game for my players, you usually have somebody that kind of runs it, and then the other people can play along with them. I would want to say I act like a god, but in the world I make the world and I help tell the story. And what's great about what Dungeons and Dragons does compared to really any other game I've ever seen, every time that you sit down in that chair to do a session or play along, it could go in a million different directions. So many different stuff could happen. It's not such as like a game where it's like, okay, I roll a die, I move 6 spaces, I try to make it to the finish line. That's the end of the game. Some games, Dungeons and Dragons, can go on for months to years at a time. Just people meeting once a week to get together to do something and be able to escape for just a little bit. So every time you do it, it is a different kind of experience than you would. Like I have done times where I've played the same story with 3 different groups of people just to see how that their adventures would skew and change. And it has, and it's just amazing to sit back and think of all the different stuff that you could do and how many different avenues things could go. Basically, if you come down and sit to play something, anticipate it might not go exactly as you might have planned it to go.
But that sounds like, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but that sounds like how it's maintained itself for what, like, I guess almost 50 years is what I read up. Like this started in the late 70s or something.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. It definitely, it started out pretty controlled. The player manual in the beginning was quite rigid, and you kind of did have that board game feel. But as it has evolved to the 5th book now, it has definitely become much more open ended and customizable.
Very cool. Very cool. Now, I mentioned briefly about those dice, right? Now, some people, again, who have heard of D&D, maybe they've I don't know, they've read about it here and there, and they may know that this game has some very unusual looking dice, right? Like it's not just the 6-sided, although I think that is one of them, right? But you have a D20. You have my favorite, the 100, which is like the size of a golf ball, essentially. And you have some other, you have one that's like a triangle. How do you use these things? What purposes do they serve? How do these things kind of function within the game? Tyler, we can start with you on that one.
I wasn't ready for me to start, but so I'll start with the 4-sided die that you mentioned. It's interesting because it is pyramid shaped, so you don't necessarily roll it, you more or less throw it, and whatever the tip of the pyramid is on, that's typically what you go with. But the roll of the dice, as in ROLE, is to get that chance effect. You start off by describing what you want to do, and then the dice determine how well or not so well the effects are of your choice.
Okay, so is it kind of like based on a range then, like of numbers, or is it?
Yeah.
I guess in that specific one, maybe because it only has a few sides, it would be a specific number sometimes, right?
Yeah, typically 1 is failure, 20 is success, and then the difficulty of the action is that range in the middle.
Awesome. Wow. Okay, that's so I mentioned to these guys, this is for the audience, of course, but I mentioned to these guys before we started really recording, is that I used to play this, or I did play it a handful of times way back, maybe the late 90s, early 2000s. And I do remember some of these things, but it's all kind of, then I forgot it, of course, for a while. Now it's kind of all coming back to me, like just the ever so slight kind of shades of gray that you can customize this game to that very point. Does anyone ever, and Ryan, you can jump in on this first. Mm-hmm. Does anyone ever get turned off by the sheer amount of options and just blank canvas, if you will, of this game that it almost sounds like to me like if you're comparing this to a restaurant, it's the Cheesecake Factory. Like the menu is 45 pages long or something. You just go, I don't know what the hell I need, you know?
Yeah. To go off with that, I have had I've actually taught on Dungeons and Dragons. I've been reached out to by my college, by some of the local high schools in the area to actually teach like some D&D sessions to their gaming clubs that they have at their high schools. And so I've done that a few times, whether if it was going and helping to show them like how to run a session and things. And it's definitely interesting to see how new people, I help get a lot of new people involved with it. And mainly one of the biggest things that I think kind of confuses people is once you first see that sheet of like, okay, I have to know and remember all this stuff. And that could be a turnoff to some people, but I think it definitely depends on too how that play group is and being understanding of, okay, this person's new, guys. Let's be nice to them and things. And to go off too with the dice, the 20-sided one is usually the biggest one that's primarily used almost nearly every session, right? Whether if it's somebody that wants to see how well that they were able to see far away or how well they were able to investigate into something and look around in their pockets successfully for maybe a loose change or something. And that's where the ranges come in that we were kind of talking about, right? So if it's perhaps in like if you use Dungeons and Dragons, for example, like we were talking about, if you're doing a attack with a weapon, a dagger or a small knife would be usually a 4-sided die, where if somebody swings like a 2-handed greatsword at you, that could be a d12 because it's obviously a larger sword and could hit more. So that's where that range kind of comes in to be more beneficial.
Yeah, because you get grazed by the weapon, right? Like you could you get cut, but not fatally cut or stabbed or something like that. That's really, I mean, that's really kind of an incredible part of it. Whereas so many games we know of just have hard and fast rules, and this game essentially just said, well, not exactly, and I like that. I like that aspect of it because this just, I mean, it sounds like a trip. You know what I mean? Like I know I've played it, but it's just been so long that I might as well not have. And it sounds like you're just sitting in for, it's like buckle up and get comfortable for a while kind of thing, which is not a bad thing. In Monopoly, it's like, hurry up, go broke already. With this, it's just like, what's next? What's next? And then the last time I had that experience was Breaking Bad. And it was like the greatest show ever for me. But it was a great, whether you think it is or not, it was a great experience for me. And that's kind of what this sounds like too. Everyone loves a good story, right? And that's how this just like unfolds layer by layer, chapter by chapter, step by step. So it sounds like a lot of fun to me. Like I said that thing about the menu, but the way you're explaining it sounds awesome.
And yeah, and to just quickly go off of that there too, and you could have players in your play group where if you're new or if you're not somebody that's very talkative and you just like to sit back and experience the story, that's perfectly fine too to do Dungeons and Dragons. Like if you're somebody where it's like, I kind of like to watch stories and don't want it to be totally have the story be about me, because ultimately Dungeons and Dragons is about you guys telling the story that the DM or Dungeon Master has written, and your characters are going through it and exploring it and experiencing it and being able to explore and do different things. Whereas if you're somebody who likes to sit back, you can certainly be able to do that while other people that you're studying with go in and investigate these things, and you're just kind of sitting back listening and your character's following along. That's totally fine to do as well. So if you're somebody that likes to watch shows and isn't totally engaged or in depth into doing it but enjoy being there, that's something where Dungeons and Dragons is great to do that as well.
Awesome. Now, a big part of Dungeons and Dragons is that you get to kind of customize, build your character, right? You get to, how does that process work exactly?
I can take this one if you want. Ryan's kind of the eternal dungeon master, and I'm the eternal player. So, as far as building a character goes for this world that is crafted around you, you primarily have your ability scores, and that's where a lot of your traits, your skills, your different abilities comes into play. So those are also a range of numbers. They can go negative, they can be positive, but at the end of the day, what you put into it is kind of up to you, because you can You can put in random numbers, or you can specifically craft your character to be perhaps a character like you said, Breaking Bad. If you wanted to play Walter White in Dungeons and Dragons, you could go right ahead and do it. There's nothing stopping you, and that's where homebrew comes in. Also, a lot of people love to homebrew their own custom stuff, which we have a whole episode about. If anybody's interested.
So if you wanted to say, like, well, I want my character, like, I mean, your abilities can be what they are, but if you wanted to like have the aesthetic of a 6'7", like 285-pound 1980s action movie hero who's juiced to the gills, you could have that, right? Like that could be totally a thing where it's like you want like a Rambo, or well, he wasn't that tall, but you know, like a He-Man kind of thing, where
Conan
it's like
Barbarian.
yeah, like something like that. You can kind of take that. It's similar to, as we were talking about Monopoly, like Monopoly has all those different versions, but at its core, it's still the game of Monopoly. You can kind of dress it like that. Is that sort of how it works?
You can have different skins on the same core rules.
Now, Ryan, you're the dungeon master, right? That's primarily your role.
Yes, it is.
Okay. You are a power-hungry god, as we've already established. You need to be stopped at all costs. Now, so on the other side of this, that there is, as we've kind of alluded to a little bit, the dungeon master, right? And this is primarily the role you take on. So if you tell our audience kind of what you do during the game, it sounds like you facilitate things, right? You kind of help run the show.
Yeah, so what I kind of do, at least for sessions, and I'm just laughing because I think about my notes that I write and then actually how things actually end up going. It's I guess few and far between, right? So I could write a few notes on how I like want to have some stuff appear in the world or certain things to happen, and my players could then decide to do something completely different. And it's up to me to adapt and change the world around them, because ultimately the story is being told with them as the main characters. So, for example, in our episodes in the past we've uploaded, there's a scene where our group runs into pirates out on the waters. And I had it set up in my notes for them to see, okay, these pirates are a lot stronger than us. So if the pirates suggested demand, that was I made pretty reasonable for them to do. I was anticipating them to just go and give the pirates what they asked for, and then the pirates would be on their way, and I could have them come back as a future later character, for example, these evil pirates. Alas, my group decided, you know what, I think we can take them. And they went and engaged with these pirates in kind of like seafair attacking and things, and so I had to adapt. I was like, okay, time to, in my head off, like, don't want to tell them, but like, you know, on my end, okay, now I have to think of a bunch of things that these pirates would have or do now in combat as these players are refusing to give in to their demands. So it's mainly about being adaptive and coming in with, like, I want to say, like a very kind of Sparks Notes plan for how you want it to go. And then as the session goes, I just am developing and unraveling more of that story as we're going on, right? So I typically don't do too much specific details unless it's something super important that I want my players to understand, and instead just do almost bullet points or little parts of my notes of like, okay, this character is going to tell them this and do these things, but they might ask him questions back that I didn't anticipate, so I have to think on the fly. You know, I basically run the entire world, and the characters play as themselves, interacting with the world that I've created.
Wow. So now a couple things with that. One that I picked up on is it's almost kind of how I somewhat script my podcast here. It's like I have an outline, I have some questions for you guys, but I don't know exactly what you're going to say. So there is that sort of randomness about it, or customization about it, that like I have to react in real time to what you're saying and everything, but I have a plan in terms of how the show is going to go. But another thing I picked up on was you said us, right? So correct me if I'm wrong, but you're not trying to make the players in this game lose, right? Like that's, you're not trying to like foil them or anything, right? Is this, you said we're trying to accomplish a common goal. Is that right?
Yeah. So to go along with that, right? I, as the DM making the world, and some play groups, you know, they could be totally against the DM, right? Like it's almost like when I play my games, I don't like to make it seem like it's the play group versus me. and like it's like a power struggle kind of thing. Some groups do that, and some groups enjoy that. I try to make it be an enjoyable experience for them to explore and investigate into things while I'm providing them details. And yes, I would play as the bad guy, such as the pirates in the example I gave earlier, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I always have to win and beat them as the pirates. You know, I always have to throw something big at them to hopefully it's like stop them in their plans. And ultimately, Dungeons and Dragons, well, it is like a fantasy game. Your characters could die and things like that, and then you have to, you know, make new ones and perhaps have a different story. And if you watch movies, right, the good guys don't always like to lose. You know, they, you know, have that little arc where they maybe dip down a little bit and are losing, and then climb up the big mountain of a story and hopefully reach the top of a happy ending someday. So it's like a cooperative kind of game in my eyes, where like I try to help them, but it ultimately comes down to the dice rolls. If my players are just by chance rolling towards 1, 2s, and 3s, which is like the low end of the 20 spectrum, with 1 being the absolute worst, I have no say in that matter. It's okay, your character, because they rolled a 1, they didn't hear the princess cry for help, so you guys are busy in the boardroom still with the evil king while the princess is being kidnapped by the king's evil brother or something, because your characters didn't hear that happen.
Wow. Okay. Very cool. Now, Tyler, how is Ryan as a dungeon master? Would you describe him, his abilities? How has he grown within that skill?
Yes. Full disclaimer, I have not had many, but I have had a few dungeon masters. Mostly Ryan though, but I love it. He's amazing, and the stories he writes are really engaging, somewhat funny depending on the type of story he's trying to write. But yeah, I'm still here. We're making a podcast.
Still here.
But
love it.
yeah, was there anything you need to know from a player's perspective on that question?
Yeah, like too. I mean, that's good. You reminded me, because like what I guess as a player makes for a more enjoyable experience, both things that Ryan has done or things that, I don't know, you've either seen or heard other players experience. Like what really, I mean, there's two ends of that, right? Like, so you're kind of reacting and he's laying it out, right? So what are some of the things within that? I mean, we talked about, like, you know, the things he does, but what things, like, kind of that you like and don't like about, not specifically maybe what he does, but just in general.
Right. I have found that the best DM for me, because, you know, I am only me as a player. So for me, the best type of DMing is when the world is challenging but not dooming. And what I mean by that is my character isn't getting beat up every single time we have an interaction. You know, there are moments for role play, which is where you're just talking, you're just describing what your character is doing, and players give just as much to a situation as a DM gives to a player. It's so interactive and cooperative, like Ryan said. And the best DMs are the cooperative ones, and Ryan is that.
Very nice. Very big props for Ryan there. Now, Ryan, when you're creating this stuff, how do you, what's your kind of like creative process? You touched on it a little bit, but like, do you like get a legal pad and scribble this out? Do you open up Microsoft Word and just kind of type away a stream of consciousness, or what do you grab something from like a show you've seen maybe, or anything like that? Or what's it like? What's your creative process like for these quests?
Yeah, so ultimately, it does depend on what's going on. So if it's like a one-shot, like a one-shot is a Dungeons and Dragons session that takes place where everyone sits down one time, there's a beginning, middle, and end to a story, that's it. And then there's a campaign. A campaign can take place where everyone sits down once a week, plays for like 5 or 6 hours, and then everyone goes home and comes back for the next week where the story continues. It's almost kind of like picture all the Hobbit, Lord of the Ring kind of movies, like how they're so long, but that's a pretty prime good example of Dungeons and Dragons to an extent where it's everyone comes and meets a few hours, does some stuff, and then goes out and comes back, and that's why the movies are longer. But to get back to the ideas of where I get my things from, I do base some of my ideas off of things such as like the main campaign we're doing currently involves these players going to certain towers to, things are going on in the world itself that hasn't come available to the players yet, except for one thing that they're going through right now with the first tower. But while things are going on in the world, I like to run my worlds where it's kind of like the world is always moving, whether if the players do stuff or not, right? And that's kind of seen in Lord of the Rings and other media as well, where it's, okay, while the players are spending all this time to do this role-play interaction, which is great, the bad guy might be off somewhere, like I mentioned before, now tying up the princess, holding her captive, things like that, and now they have to spend more time to rescue her. But ultimately, I would say I get a lot of my creativity from just growing up with playing different sorts of fantasy games, whether if it's, for example, our Dungeons and Dragons main story that we do now, while it's just Dungeons and Dragons, it is also mixed with the world of Pokemon. And I thought that was really interesting because playing some of the Pokemon games growing up, I was kind of like, oh, these little creatures are cool, but I can only use them for fighting, and that's it. Where in the world of D&D, you can make these creatures help you start fires, be able to help you climb trees, be able to do a bunch of different stuff, and you're experiencing that as if you were in the games, but you have these freedom now to do whatever you want in this world. And that's where I like to watch shows that kind of help me think of creative juices and ideas, such as The Towers, coming from a show called The Adventures of Sinbad. That's on Netflix, which helped inspire me a little bit, but I put my own twist on. For main campaigns, if it's like a one-shot, I'll kind of inspire it as for people that are out there too thinking of things based on certain movies. So kind of like The Grinch That Stole Christmas. Well, our one-shot was on the Delibird That Stole Christmas. And Delibird's like a little penguin Santa-like Pokemon that stole presents. Wow, that's just like the Grinch, you know? So I definitely recommend for people, at least if they're newer, you know, to perhaps take ideas from other sources that you found interesting to hopefully put your own little spin on to help make players' ideas and more experience. And I do use Google Docs as well. In high school, I used a notepad and carry that around with me everywhere, but I just figured Docs is so much easier because I can do it on my phone, my computer, etc. When I get a good idea, if I'm out somewhere, I can quickly jot it down and I'll have it. So
cool. Wow. I mean, do you interact with other, I'm sure you know, and have like friends and stuff that are other dungeon masters? Like, do you have like kind of I was gonna say like a focus group, but that's not really it, but like just some sort of like message thread or something, like a text thread or something?
Yeah.
Like, hey, I've tried this in my game, maybe you want to try this in yours, or here's an idea I've had, could work in your adventure, something like that.
I'm even a few Facebook forum groups that post different things involving like different monsters and creatures that you can use in your games. And then I'm also part of a few Reddits and then a few Discord groups that are based around D&D to help me get some different ideas. And then that way I can give feedback to people too and say, hey, how does this sound to people? Do you think that'd be something enticing for players to go through? Because ultimately, yes, I'm doing this for quite a good number of years, but being able to know, hey, how does this sound to people to help, you know, reassure before I throw it at the players and then have them be like, well, this was not very fun or just totally lost. And that's where sometimes too, if I have something planned, and I talked about this before, where if I have something planned and I have to make changes, I might be typing on my end just like while they're playing to cement ideas and be like, okay, make little stars to go back and change stuff later now that they've altered that in the world, right? Where if it's like, okay, we did hear that princess scream and we were able to stop the evil brother from stealing that princess away. Now it's kind of like, so all my stuff that I could have written about him taking her, I now have to change and adapt later on. And I can feed that to other forums or Reddits or Facebook groups to help with that sort of thing.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. This is like sort of a little bit like a trickle down effect of like one thing affecting another. It's like a butterfly effect sort of thing on stuff. Now, this question is for both of you, and Tyler, we'll start with you. Is you guys have mentioned that these games have taken that they can last several hours, right? And you could pick them back up a few days later, sometimes a week. Has there ever been a quest or an adventure? I keep saying quest. Is there a name or a proper name that they're called? Like these, I know there's a one shot, but like these overarching adventures, are they called something?
Yeah, no, quest is fine. Yeah,
That's acceptable. Okay.
Campaign could be like a big adventure, like the big story, and then in that you have like the little quests, like or side quests people could go on, like that are all part of the big campaign.
Okay.
If that makes sense there. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. That helps. Okay. So has there ever been a quest or campaign that's left you guys like mentally exhausted from just being engrossed in the game and all that kind of stuff? And I don't know why I sound like the the Dark Emperor or the Sith or anything. But has that ever happened to you guys? And again, Tyler, we'll start with you as kind of the player in this. When you've played, like you just go, oh, need a cigarette or something, afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. It depends on the party of players, I will say, because there have been some times where just some unfathomable things have happened with my players when I'm sitting here jaw wide open, like, did you really just say that? Like, that's what you're gonna do? So yeah, there are definitely moments like that. But as far as the campaigns and quests that Ryan creates for us, I have had no qualms with that. His writing is always on point and makes sense in the world. It's usually some chaotic players that get us into trouble, so that can leave me kind of shaking my head at the end.
Because I guess ultimately too, right? Like if I'm the DM who's writing this world and I threw something at my players that I did not think would be a huge struggle, but with it being Dungeons and Dragons and you roll a die to attack and to do certain things, you do almost everything actually. When you roll a die to do something, and if you keep rolling bad on it, the bad guy may just be now all of a sudden on top of you guys. And me as a dungeon master, I picked up a few tricks of the trade over the years of how to handle situations like that. So like there was one situation where I remember there was a small encounter that I had planned at this toll booth, and I remember it's all about that, and it ended up running like
Toll booth.
10 to 12 hours of them trying to do the scene because one player did something during this time, and I had to react accordingly to how I feel people would in this world as the player did it. And then afterwards everyone was like, well, that wasn't very fun. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry, but if you're going to do or say something that, would cause people to react, I'm not going to not have them react, So it's mainly, I'd say about, there has been times where, there's people that just maybe find D&D is not the best for them or like to cause chaos and things, which, enough chaos is certainly fine, but there could be certain levels where, all right, that just caused a lot of stuff to change. So sometimes campaigns or stories or quests have to end because maybe the players do something different that just totally altered how that could have gone, and now they can't do it anymore. But
like, if I can interject real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
Like, imagine if Frodo kept the ring. That's kind of how it can go sometimes. If they don't destroy the ring and they end up keeping it, then all the heroes are just lost and or dead.
And something that I do recommend for dungeon masters to do, especially if you're new to this kind of thing, is also to understand perhaps there's certain subjects that your characters aren't the most comfortable with being brought up or happening. Not to say that, certain things, but let's say perhaps a player is trying to get over an addiction to cigarettes or something. And you mentioned how the barkeep is constantly blowing smoke in this like woman's face that he's trying to seduce, and she's having no part of it. But that could be a certain thing that could perhaps trigger the player to then not want to play anymore. And that's where just asking ahead of time, hey, like, and maybe just DMing your group, like directly messaging, having them saying to them, hey, is there anything that might be a little sensitive for you that perhaps you wouldn't want to have said? And that's totally fine. And, I've had certain situations where players have messaged me saying, hey, I didn't like how that went, so I've had to change stuff. But ultimately, like, if something crazy does happen in the moment, like, just make sure that everyone's kind of okay with it. And then it's definitely a learning, growing process. Because I've done, almost double digits now for different campaigns I've set up, and maybe they've trickled off and players couldn't come to any more meetings or whatever. But I've done different stories where, like, all different adventures, all different things, and certain play groups have been really intense stuff, such as, witnessing certain actions done by certain people in the world that made them angry and wanted to have them pursue them, where if I did that thing with the same play group, I know that they would not want to have any part of that and just say to me, no, I don't want to do any of that, which, is totally fair.
Sure, absolutely. Now, when you have to kind of if you play for several hours at a time, you got to take a break at some point, right? And pick it back up the next day or next week or whatever. And Tyler, we can start again with you on this one. Do you ever find it difficult to just to pick it back up again after, again, being kind of engrossed in the game for a while at a time, and then having all that time away? Is the first hour or so a little would say rough, but just not the same as like once you get a lather going.
Yeah, absolutely. Even a week at a time, like say we miss a week just because of holidays or whatever. Coming back from that break always feels a little weird. There's like almost like a cloud over us, and we haven't quite gotten the sunshine yet. Um, but yeah, fatigue definitely happens even towards the end of an episode when we've been going on for hours now. It's just like, come on, it's late. I want to go to bed. So it happens.
You must
But
roll to go to bed.
roll to go to bed, exactly. So it definitely happens, and that's where I just think communication between players and dungeon master is just important. If the players aren't having it, then just call it a little early or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Now, of course, we're still very much in a pandemic, unfortunately, and this seems like the kind of thing that you could play over Zoom or FaceTime or Skype or something like that. Ryan, is this a game that doesn't lose too much over distance? Is that something you could still play and still pretty much enjoy it the way you would if you were in person?
Oh, yeah, for sure. So, while there is the element of talking over voice and things, there is, like, if you were sitting at home at the play table, like a table, and you have your grid map there, and the player or the DM could draw out what the scenery looks like around you and be able to experience that. There's some forms of just online stuff that you don't even have to download. You can just play on your web browser, and everybody can hop in, and it's just like playing Dungeons and Dragons at home. So, like, one of the ones that we use for our podcast is called Roll20, and it's free for everyone to use, and you can incorporate really any pictures you want, any sceneries you want. And of course, they have like their plus and promo versions where you can pay more to get more features, but everything you need at home, you can then be able to play online with people, whether it's nearby, across the world, things like that. As long as everybody can pick a time to come together, which could be hard for some people to have a time with things going on, but especially now people being at home, it's I think a great way to help the time go by while you're at home and looking for some social engagement.
Awesome. Now, so to kind of wrap up the main, portion of the show, and Tyler, we can start with you on this one. To get like beginners, which has kind of like been our focus of the show, to get them involved in this game. Let's say that they want to play D&D, but they don't know anyone else that wants to play D&D with them. Just one guy, one gal, whoever they may be. How would they go about getting started? That can be probably a little more difficult, and I don't know if like the local comic book store is still even maybe doing that sort of thing, if they do it at all, but because of the pandemic, of course. But so how would like one person kind of get going with that today, now in late 2020, early 2021?
Yeah. If First off, online forums are the best way to reach out to people if you're flying solo. You don't have any friends or any family that are already interested. Um, Definitely taking to Facebook, to Reddit, things of that nature can definitely be a good way to find those resources. But if you if you do have like a friend, even just a friend, you can set up a D&D game just with one running it and then one player. It's totally possible. So that is a good thing. And then you mentioned comic book stores. I'm not sure exactly how they're running with the pandemic, but I do know that at least the comic book stores in my area of Albany still run D&D games in the back, other card game, lots of card games in the back. They're still very active in keeping that kind of origin of D&D alive. So it can be hard to find it, but once you do, it'll feel like home. Hopefully.
Well, and that something I didn't know is that, like, I guess you think of, when you think of Dungeons and Dragons, if you've played it at all, or you've just kind of heard of it, or you've seen it somewhere on like a TV show or something, you think of it as a dungeon master and like at least, I don't know, throw out an arbitrary number of like 4 or 5 other people. But it's cool that you can just 2 people can do it, right? Because that's going to definitely increase the chances of new players getting in the game, or anyone that just kind of wants to pick it up casually can, just like, oh, okay, I know one other person that would probably want to do this. We can get started. That's great,
Yeah, I've heard stories of siblings, even someone running a game for their cat. Dress up your cat and just tell a story to your cat like that. That can be just as fun and engaging as with the person, because you know that's your friend too.
And to point out too, there for new people too that are kind of like, what are maybe some adventures I could use to get me started, things like that. I use this thing called DM's Guild. It's a pretty popular thing that people use online, where people can write up their own stories and publish them for people to see. And some of those modes are some of those that are there are even for like one person to play. So if there is by chance ways that you can't find anybody or ways to have somebody else play with you and you want to do a one-shot or an adventure just on your own, they do make campaigns and ways for you to just play using like adventures that people have made, which I think is something incredible. And I was just looking quick, the Dungeons and Dragons Reddit, just because I'm on it, look at it quick, they have 2.3 million people in the Reddit.
Wow.
So I can guarantee if you probably ask something or say, hey, what's a good way for me to reach out to some people, I guarantee there'll probably be people that message you saying, hey, my play group has openings at this time, when are you available, things like that. And it'd be a great way to join into a group or even a future community with some friends.
Oh, there you go. That's awesome. Yeah. So I mean, and we talked about the dice. We talked about kind of some other things, some physical supplies. Do you need some bare minimum things? Ryan, you can take this one to kind of get started right off the bat.
So I would say you can actually, if you just on Google and you type in like D&D dice, I think it is on Google, like you could look up the prices of physical Dungeons and Dragons dice, but there's a lot of like free apps you could use to be able to have those dice if you don't want to spend money. I know people that use tons of different stuff, and even if you like say to Google, type in like roll a D20 and it'll show you all different dice you can roll for Dungeons and Dragons when you put that in. So necessarily buying dice is an easy thing you can just have on your phone, online, or on the computer. And on there used to be a way to just see a player's handbook online for free. I haven't been able to find that as of late, so they may have moved that or taken that down. But if you're starting, it's kind of good to at least watch some people on YouTube. Like I kind of recommend Matt Colville as somebody to watch to help you in how to run Dungeons and Dragons. He has an amazing series on how to get started in D&D, especially if you're a dungeon master and want to be able to play for people at home. I recommend checking out some of his videos because he goes in depth on the basics, how to do things, and then that way you wouldn't need to necessarily buy a book or a player's handbook on how to get started, because you can just have all that there. And D&D Beyond has the name D&D Beyond has all the races, classes, things like that you can use, and it helps you make a character sheet. And as you do all that, so technically you could do this for free. Like you don't have to pay tons of money to be able to get involved with this. Now certain people do because they enjoy it so much, but you can certainly get started free doing this.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I didn't even think about it. You could use like a random number generator or something, right, for your die or whatever. Now, to kind of wrap it up, Tyler, we would start with you on this one. What would be like your main, just kind of leaving us with a piece of advice for beginning players or anyone that's sort of on the fence about thinking of diving into the world of Dungeons and Dragons? What would you just kind of say as your one thing to keep in mind or to think about before getting into the game?
Yeah, the one thing, if it had to be just one, would be try it just once for an hour, and within that hour you will get a feel for if you like it or not. And I haven't met someone who after trying it didn't really like it. So this says a lot.
So just give it a shot. Keep it in mind.
Opportunity. Take it. It's a game. What do you got to lose?
Exactly. Ryan, what about you?
Yeah. To kind of go off that that same subject there's been like, if you're afraid of things where it's like, oh, I'm not well versed in the world of fantasy, I wouldn't know half the stuff that's brought up. There's been people like, people always say kind of like, oh, D&D's for nerds, things like that. No, like there's been people throughout history like Stephen Colbert, Robin Williams, Vin Diesel, George R.R. Martin, just, people that have like played Dungeons and Dragons for people like through their lives and have enjoyed it. So it's not just something that like, nerds just play or, I'm not about that. Literally, Dungeons and Dragons can be something for anybody doing anything to play and enjoy in my mind. And I do agree with Tyler where it's about just, you don't know if you don't try it, right? So it's kind of like if I just immediately push it away without trying it or seeing what it's like, then I'll never know if I like it or not. And then I'll just always think, oh, if I liked it or not. But if you can find a play group or even just yourself wanting to try it, there is ways to just have yourself just try it and see if you enjoy it.
Very cool. Appreciate you guys coming on and talking in depth and bringing me up to speed on kind of the nuts and bolts of everything. It's very informative. I think you helped out a lot of new players and people that are just kind of, maybe they've heard of it, before tonight. So on this episode, so I appreciate that. And we will now get into the bonus round. Time for the bonus round on Let's Ask an Expert. 5 questions, sometimes, not always, relating to my guest area of expertise. Gentlemen, are you ready for the bonus round?
Yeah, man.
Yes, I think so.
All right. First question, we'll start with Ryan. This is true or false, and we'll give you guys both a chance to answer this one. True or false? So as I kind of mentioned the Big Bang Theory before. The Big Bang Theory, true or false, was a funny, well-written show that positively impacted nerd culture. What say you, sir?
I have seen a few episodes, so positively impacted. I'd say true. Should we go into like in depth of why, or just a
Give me a
true?
brief explanation as to why.
Yeah. So I would say too, because it can show that a lot of different people can be nerds to that extent, right? Whether if you have like people comparing between Leonard and Sheldon, where it's kind of, there may be different levels of, I guess, nerd or nerdy people, but they have had their impacts on nerd culture of all different things. So I'd say definitely it's helped show that there's more out there than just the quiet nerdy guy. There can be more than just that by being a different person. Everybody could be a nerd to that extent,
Tyler, what about you?
I will say yes, and the simple reason of we're talking about it.
That's okay. There you go. I bring it up because they've had at least a couple episodes of Dungeons and Dragons, and one was like a Christmas theme, I think, where they had to ring bells in a certain order to like prevent a door from opening and things like that. And Leonard was the dungeon master. I thought it was cool, like that they brought that out. I really like that show. My wife and I watch it on rerun quite a bit. I think it has. I think, especially, to your point, Ryan, that just like it showed a lot of different people are nerds. I mean, I'm a nerd, but I wasn't always being stuffed in a trash can. That was only yesterday, last week. It doesn't always happen. All right, question 2. This one will be for Ryan. Now, I didn't mention this. I neglected to mention this at the beginning of the show. Ryan, you're going to school with the career goal of being a pediatric ICU nurse.
That is correct. Yes.
And I think that's fantastic. It's extremely admirable. Working, you also work in the front lines of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I want to say thank you for everything you've done and continue to do. You are, sir, a true hero. Now, when you become that pediatric ICU nurse, what part of your job are you least looking forward to and why?
I would say I am probably least looking forward to the aspect of, and I might get a little serious or deep here, but the aspect of, especially because you're with children, right? These are human beings that haven't been able to experience life, and chances are if they're in the ICU, stuff happened one way or another that brought them here into intensive care, and it could be insanely tough for those children to deal with that, and perhaps they have something now that has impacted their life greatly. And I think the toughest thing is going to be to help that child understand that while something may have happened today to you, there's no need for you to think that this is how it's always going to be, because it may get better, it may improve, and being able to help children to understand that stuff could get better, it's not always just like this, is I think one of the toughest things that you'll have to adapt as a nurse. Second thing would probably be dealing with parents, because you hear that all the time of a parent freaking out about their child, rightfully so, but or even like wanting to just say the nurses and doctors aren't doing their jobs when in reality we are. It's just the world and things work certain ways that's outside of everybody's control.
Understood. Well, again, thank you for everything that you do. Now, Tyler, I want to leave you out for question 3. And admittedly, it's probably a little bit unfair, but this is a little bit more lighthearted. So, Ryan, I'll give you a chance. But after Tyler, because we wanted to give Tyler first chance at this, 2-part question here for Tyler. First, you could choose any superpower to possess. What would it be and why?
This is the question. This is the question that plagues my daily existence.
Oh, no.
If I had a superpower, I would have to pick fire manipulation. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And that's because I want to be everybody's warmth. If you need someplace warm and protective, I'm there. I got you.
Now, have you dropped that line on anyone yet? Have you used that in a pickup line or any kind of thing like that? That sounds hard right there.
Maybe. Might have to.
Ryan, we'll give you a chance at that one. Superpower. Hit me.
I've kind of liked the idea of like shape-shifting or like Beast Boy kind of powers from Teen Titans, but I guess into anything I'd want as opposed to just animals, right? So if it's changing into certain people or being able to do certain things, and by doing that, it could help make people's lives a little enjoyable. Whether if it's, to jump back quick, like somebody's sick in the hospital and then you come in as like an actual clown. They don't know it's you, but you've become like a clown, or you've become like a dog to help make people feel better, like different things, being able to use that power for good, to help improve people's lives. Even if it's just like seeing somebody that they haven't seen in a long time can help do wonders for the person.
I like it. Nice answer. Actually, nice answer for both of you guys. Question 4, and this is for both of you. All right. Now we have one of those classic who would win in a fight. All right. But this is going to be a little bit of a twist on this one. We have Cyclops, right? We all know Cyclops from X-Men. Mm-hmm. Or we have Skunk Man, a recently made up superhero whose only power is to excrete toxic green gas out of his butt, causing temporary and in some cases permanent blindness, nausea, vomiting, and hallucinations. Who do you got? Skunk Man or Cyclops? Tyler, we can start with you.
Start with me? Well, I'll go... All right, I got it. I'll go with Cyclops because while Skunk Man can blind, and that is very effective, Cyclops does have eye covering over his eyes, so that might not be as effective on him as it would on other opponents. So I'll have to give it to Cyclops.
Okay. Ryan?
So, from my understanding, Skunk Man can just shoot this gas, whereas Cyclops shoots basically lasers. I do feel like Cyclops could deal a lot more damage to Skunk Man before Skunk Man could have an effect on Cyclops.
This is a wide-reaching gas, right? Like you can just envelop a whole city block or something like that. And again, I'm making this backstory.
Oh, of course.
But this is Skunk Man. Start the comic, buy the T-shirt. Yeah, no, I'm with you. Probably Cyclops. I have to give him the nod on that one too. Okay, final question.
Unless the gas acts.
Oh, I'm sorry. Say that again.
Oh, sorry. Unless the gas can act as a smoke screen, then maybe.
See, that's what I should.
Can the gas like block the laser beam? Like, is it that thick, like that potent?
I was thinking more of like, if you can't see Skunk Man, can you hit Skunk Man with your lasers?
And meanwhile, he's smelling it, right? Now that we're talking.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe Skunk Man gets the nod on that one. All right, question 5, and again, this is for both of you. Ryan, we can start with you. Fill in the blank. My goal for 2021 is blank.
My goal for 2021 would probably have to be, for the longest time, we have a gym downstairs and I've never used it. but I've always kind of been wanting to, and I recently got AirPods for Christmas, so I think I might start to try to use the gym, because ultimately if I was more in shape and felt better, I could, be more physically fit and be able to do my job better. So I think it would probably be to start working out, even if it's just at home.
Well, I have prioritized health more myself. I think it's a great goal, and this I'm looking down now. I have a Fitbit Charge 4 that I got for Christmas, and this is I'm not gonna say it's like changed my life, but what it's done is kind of like been a constant daily reminder to do something active, right? And so that's kind of helped. But I think it's an awesome goal. I do know again from experience that it will help you feel better on a day-to-day basis, but also have a functional purpose in your job as well. So I think that's awesome. Tyler, how about you?
Yeah, my goal is, while active, it is more social. I want to be engaged with my friends and family more. I feel like since I've been kind of on my own in my own world of life, I've kind of neglected my relationships. So I wanna get to know people a little more in my life.
Very cool. All right. Well, uh, I give the last word on the show to all my guests. Of course, you guys are no different. So, Tyler, we'll start with you. You have the last word. Have at it, my friend.
I will say to all you listeners, stay humble yet hungry.
Powerful, powerful. I'd like it, Brian.
I would say, and this is kind of sounds like a knockoff little movie thing, but kind of where it's like every good thing that you do, it's going to cause another good thing to happen to somebody else, usually, or primarily, whether even if it's the smallest thing. So it'd probably be to go out and at least try to do one positive thing for somebody that you can, whether if it's at home calling grandma who you haven't spoken to in forever, or if it's out somewhere holding the door for somebody who's carrying a bunch of things. It could make somebody's entire day, just knowing that somebody else is thinking about them, especially during these times. So
I like it, guys. Well, again, thank you so much for doing this, and the power of Reddit for turning this around on short notice. Like I just
mhm.
reached out to you guys and like, yeah, sounds great. And here we are doing it. Like what day or so later, and
Yeah.
it's awesome. I appreciate it. I really do. For my guests, Ryan Nolan and Tyler Swint, I'm your host Andrew Smith, and we will see you next time on Let's Ask an Expert.
And remember, DM told me to.
Be confident in your knowledge as an expert and share with those who need it.